O thou kind Lord, these are thy servants who have gathered in this meeting, have turned unto thy kingdom, and are in need of thy bestowal and blessing. O thou God, manifest and make evident the signs of thy oneness, which have been deposited in all the realities of life. Reveal and unfold the virtues which thou hast made latent and concealed in these human realities. O God, we are plants, and thy bounty is as the rain. Refresh and cause these plants to grow through thy bestowal. We are thy servants. Free us from the fetters of material existence. We are ignorant. Make us wise. We are dead. Make us alive. We are material. Endow us with spirit. We are deprived. Make us the intimates of thy mysteries. We are needy. Enrich and bless us from thy boundless treasuries. O God, resuscitate us. Give us sight. Give us hearing. Familiarize us with the mysteries of life, so that the secrets of thy kingdom may become revealed to us in this world of existence, and we may confess thy oneness. Every bestowal emanates from thee. Every benediction is thine. Thou art mighty, thou art powerful, thou art the giver, and thou art the ever bounteous.
Thank you, Olga. Just want to welcome everyone today. This is for our presentation with Paul Hanley. You're sponsored by the Agriculture Working Group of the Association for Baha'i Studies of North America. So, Paul, do you want to get started now?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Dawn.
And you can go ahead and share screen.
Okay. And thanks for everybody who came out today. Nice to see you. Quite a few familiar faces here. And one of the collaborators in our project, Neil Watley, is here too, so he can add in his, as they say in Hawaii, manao. So yeah, this is a story about things that are going on in Canada, but I a couple of years ago, my wife and I pioneered to Molokai in Hawaii. So I've got my Hawaiian shirt on today, which is being all dressed up. Even the fact that I have a shirt on is quite a thing. It's fairly hot these days, but it's good to see you all, and I'm looking forward to sharing this story with you. It's kind of exciting, the developments that are underway. And I thought I would just start with a video. It's a short video that was made about our project, and that'll give you kind of a taste of what's going on and some of the people that are involved. And so we'll just start out with that, and then I'll get into kind of explaining more what the background of this story is and what's happening today with our project. So we'll see how it goes here. Okay.
People were simply just beat off their land base.
Our systems for agriculture fell apart. And they tried to bury us, and they didn't realize we were the seed when they buried us. (1491), before European contact, most indigenous nations on the continent here were agriculturalists and growers. They grow corn, beans, and squash. And then European diseases wiped out 90% of the population by the early 1700s. We were put on reservations, and the non-Indigenous people were given all the rest of the land. The systems for agriculture fell apart. The Western diet is not suitable for First Nations. We're eating a lot of flour and a lot of things we shouldn't be eating. We haven't got the enzymes to break down properly. But the food and the plants are our medicine.
This province became an entity in 1905, and of course there were various treaties written, and certain conditions were put forward for welcoming the settler. And to date, a lot of those conditions have not been met. And people were simply just beat off their land base. You know, the Indigenous farmers on the land were just taken off the land. How can you be food secure if your traditional homeland's been taken away from you?
We have relationship with the land, we have relationship with the animals, we have relationship with the plants, we have relationship with the settlers, and we need to set that relationship right again.
My name is Marla Carlson. I'm the Executive Director at Sask Organics. We're the industry association for certified organic farmers and processors in Saskatchewan. One of the things that makes our team a little bit different is that we're a loose network of people who work in different areas that are covered by our vision. We have academics and we have people working in agriculture, environmentalists, conservationists. We have people across the board. And that's, I think, one of the real strengths of our vision is that it is looking at all of the different aspects that create food sovereignty.
They signed the treaties with the First Nations not expecting that we would make it into the 20th century. And they tried to bury us. And they didn't realize we were the seed when they buried us, tried to bury us.
One of our solutions is to develop what we're calling a solutions lab. And what the solutions lab allows is people to gather together to come up with solutions for local food systems.
Well, we're educating our young people on how to grow their food and how to take care of themselves. My job is to facilitate that education. This whole garden here was planted by the students of our school here. We grew 2 acres of potatoes and another acre of corn, beans, squash. We planted some raspberries, strawberries. We're planting some haskellap. We're starting a food forest. 99% of our students have never planted a seed before in their life until this year. We should seed before in their life until this year. I've never planted a seed before in their life until this year. We should.
Sorry about that.
%99 of our students have never planted a seed before in their life until this year. We should be eating the foods that our ancestors gave us and taught us how to grow and how to use and how to have a relationship with.
So a regenerative model of agriculture is to ensure that our air is clean and our water is drinkable and the land is regenerated. The idea is that if we have healthy soil, we have healthy plants and we have healthy people.
The role of people in their own food.
Sorry about the glitches.
Yeah. Paul, you may want to just stop it a second. And
People were
let it
simply
buffer.
just beat off.
Okay.
Just let it buffer a little bit. And this may be a good point to mention. I didn't actually introduce Paul, just kind of jumped into it. But I did want to mention, Paul, while we're waiting here, is that for those of you who are not familiar, a lot of us are probably familiar with Paul Hanley. And as you know, he's written many books and articles that have to do with the intersection of environment and agriculture. and their intersection with religion. Some of his books, if some of you are maybe aware, are the book 11, which has to do with the population, the prediction of population growth. Man of the Trees, Richard St. Bard Baker, the first global conservationist, and the Spirit of Agriculture. And also this interesting article, Begin with the Village, the Baha'i Approach to Agriculture. So maybe we can, maybe we've buffered enough at this point. We can start
Okay,
again.
yeah, sorry about that. It's
That's fine, that
unusual.
happens.
Unusual, where we've got a good internet.
Off their land base.
Try and find out where we were.
Yeah, kind of in the middle somewhere.
I think we were right around here.
Yeah.
The role of people in their own food production is missing right now. We need to be much more closely tied to our food system so that we recognize that when we destroy something in the process of creating our food, we realize that we have just destroyed something and something needs to change.
A lot of my students that I teach were, farmers. And now a lot of the family farms have disappeared with the very controlling factors of corporate agriculture. So we have a crisis, and we figure that the best people to help solve it are the ones on the ground.
I started the Vegetable Academy while operating our own farm here. People wanting to grow their own food at home come to me with questions, and the Vegetable Academy provides them with the tools, the resources, and our growing methods that they can use at home to grow their own food more successfully, with more confidence, and with less time. There's no shipping required. There is no large-scale machinery required, and the quality is superior because we're taking it fresh off the vine and right into our homes.
Children do well with candid, authentic truth. They know if you're telling them something that's real or not. My goal is to, teach an ecologically literate generation and then have that translate into land practices. So this location is called Brightwater Science, Environmental, and Indigenous Learning Center. It's quite a vision. There's 160 acres that the children get to explore. We have about 4,000 students a year.
We cannot look at the state of the land without looking at the state of the family, without looking at the state of the community, without looking at food insecurity. So it's all connected. It's all linked together. And if we can crack the code on one, it strengthens that whole list of issues.
We've been a loose collection of individuals, and we've been developing relationships, and now it feels like we're taking that next step and formalizing the organization and working on creating the Solutions Lab. And I think by reimagining a food system where everybody has access to healthy, nutritious, affordable food, there will be a level of respect and understanding that we don't have right now. Food is just so central to who we are that if we can focus on food, the rest will follow. I think for me, what I have been learning in the process is that I really need to educate myself. There's definitely that reconnection to the land, and between Indigenous people and settlers, a recognition that we are all treaty people.
kwayēskastasowin, wâhkôhtowin. kwayēskastasowin, setting things right. wâhkôhtowin, all our relations. For the long term, I would hope that we grow enough culturally appropriate food to meet all our needs and to live a better life in peace with our neighbors. Setting that relationship right, I believe, is what we need for reconciliation.
Okay, well, that gives you a bit of a taste of what our project is and where we're going. And I'm just going to share now some slides that kind of give you the background. And we'll see how that goes. So we have this vision of transforming our food system. And what happened was that the Rockefeller Foundation decided to set up a food system vision prize. And they asked people around the world to look at ways of transforming the food system with a 30-year or so time horizon. What would we like to see the food system be like in 2050? So they put out a call, and actually I was at a Baha'i Studies conference in Toronto, I think it was, and ran into Roy Steiner with the Rockefeller Foundation. He told me about the prize. And I thought it'd be interesting to enter and, just bring together some of the thinking of people around the Prairie region where I had lived my whole life, and to see what we could come up with a food vision. And I was surprised when we actually were chosen. There were 1,300 applications for the prize from around the world. And they chose 10 visions for this $2 million prize, to share a $2 million prize. And they chose our group, kwayēskastasowin, wâhkôhtowin, as one of the groups. But this just gives you an idea on this slide, the kind of range of projects that are going on around the world that are really very exciting. You can see people entering into a transformative process and seeing where it goes. Interesting, there's one project in Lima, Peru, which is really very, very interesting project. Also has a Baha'i quite involved in that project. So yes, our group is kwayēskastasowin wâhkôhtowin. So as Joe Monroe said in the film, kwayēskastasowin means kind of making things right, and wâhkôhtowin means the kind of the relationship between all things. So it might mean, some people I've asked said, well, it means your cousins and your friends, and other people say no, it's like a much more dynamic thing with all things in the world basically being connected. So we thought that was a very fitting title for where we wanted to go with this project. So it seemed like when we looked at a vision for the prairies, we needed to look back to the historical perspective, and what were the issues with our system, what were the problems with our system. And when we look back at it with a historical perspective, you see that really the ways where it went wrong really started with the whole settlement process. So before that, Indigenous people had food systems that were sustainable and harmonious and equitable, and settlement changed all of that. So these food systems in the prairies have gone through many changes. One of the most dramatic was this change in 1870, when the Dominion Land Survey happened. One of the biggest, I guess, the only other one that would be comparable was what happened in the United States, when the land was divided into 1 mile squares. And this was to kind of bring in an extractive system of agriculture that was really designed to support European society, the Industrial Revolution in Europe. That was, I guess, a sort of a safety valve for moving people, farmers and so on, from Europe over to North America to settle, but also to create a large food supply for industrial development in Europe and in Eastern North America. So without really due consideration of the Indigenous population and their land systems, their agricultural systems, this system was imposed, and it was kind of like a imposition of an industrial model where everything is divided into squares and to facilitate the easy transportation of products from the land, grain from the land. But at the same time, a series of treaties was made, which Priscilla Satie in the film mentioned. And the Indigenous understanding of these treaties was it was a way of kind of welcoming settlers to come into the region while preserving the rights of the Indigenous people. So the treaties weren't really followed in a really equitable and just way. But today, there's a growing understanding of these treaties and the understanding that actually all the people in the prairie region are treaty people. So both the settler and the Indigenous population. And so in terms of this vision that we had for the future, we thought that being in treaty was a very central part of it, to understand that nature of our relationship. So today we're seeing Indigenous people, their culture and their food systems are starting to be resurge and come back. And for a long time, people were beaten down and oppressed, but these people are Indigenous people are really coming back into their own and gaining their power again. And so people are really becoming aware of emergent opportunities to create a more equitable and sustainable system of partnerships and relationship between Indigenous and settler populations. So we put together a team of people, very diverse, and this team really started to develop this concept of this vision moving forward and how we could bring about transformative change. And so the people involved have been engaged in this process in different ways since the 1970s or even before, and looking at different ways of improving our food systems. So what we talked about is kind of creating a new narrative. There was a narrative about the whole food system, which was about really industrial, extractive agriculture. Could we develop a different kind of a system, a different narrative of what kind of food system we wanted that was credible, that could really engage people in thinking about food system change? So we developed, one of the things we knew is that it had to be comprehensive. And as Priscilla Satie said in the family, really, you have to have all elements of the system. Families have to be involved. You have to have children and youth involved. And you have to think in terms of what kind of diets we want, what kind of culture we want in the area and so on. So we came up with this food systems map, which had 140 lines of action and identified 40 stakeholder groups. We'll go in a little bit more detail into that in the coming slides. And our vision had basically 5 themes. We needed to ensure that farms were prosperous. But in this case, we're talking about farms that are internally optimized, so they're not as reliant on external inputs. And where the producer is really at the center of the food system, not the supplier. So today it seems like a large percentage of farm income, I've seen figures from 20% to I should say, put it the other way, 80% to 90% of farm income goes to suppliers, to energy, to chemicals and seed, and to banks and so on. So we're talking about creating systems where the farmer can be more prosperous by being more internally optimized through systems like agroecology. The second theme was reconciliation amongst all the peoples, this idea of recognizing we're all treaty peoples and thinking in terms of decolonization. So what does that mean? It's something we have to explore. I mean, there's certain realities. The settler population is here and it's a majority. So how do you decolonize? What does that mean? How do we have a full consultation about creating systems that are more fair and inclusive of everyone? We talked about people-centered food systems, so systems that were more local, more diverse, and community-centered. and the importance of revitalizing rural areas. And at one time, the prairies had a very strong rural community base. And as farm size increased, rural communities dwindled. So we talked about, could we have more people again in these small rural communities? Could we enliven them, make more vibrant communities, provide more opportunities for young people to stay through agriculture, but also other activities like virtual commuting and so on. We talked about restoring traditional systems. So there are traditional food systems Indigenous people had through hunting, gathering, and planting. Could those systems be recreated, and to what extent? And one of the things that would be necessary is more sharing of land. And there are, interestingly, groups in our area where settlers and Indigenous people are trying to find more innovative ways of sharing land so that private ownership isn't absolutely exclusive, but it also opens opportunities for things like hunting and gathering and so on private land. Then we talked about healing the land and supporting ecosystem function, ensuring that a fairly large percentage, maybe even up to 50% of land was actually being restored in natural ecosystems, grasslands, parklands, and wetlands. So we were thinking in terms of a 30-year vision. This would take a considerable amount of time to bring about some major changes. And we talked about strengthening the network that we were building, that we were actually identifying. There was a network of people who were very interested in all aspects of this project, or different aspects of it, bringing them together and strengthening that. We spent in our application for this vision grant, we identified many signals and trends. We had about 50 different signals of things that were already happening in the prairie region that were very consistent with this vision. So it wasn't like we were starting from zero. There's many emergent solutions going on out there. So we thought, let's identify those and strengthen those. And a way we came up with was we call a solution lab, or a social innovation lab, or now we're talking about the term solution hub, as a way of kind of identifying things together and building these networks. So yes, this emergent solution, we're thinking in certain ways this vision was already happening, because there are thousands of people, dozens of organizations and institutions who are already doing the kind of things that we hoped would happen. And some of them were shown in the film. And definitely in a growing Indigenous food system movement, where people are restoring activities like hunting and fishing and gathering to build systems that were very productive in the past. And we developed 6 areas of action. And I'll just go through a few of the things that we're thinking of in each of these areas, because a food system transformation is also a transformation of community, of culture, of family, economy, technology. All of these things have to be working together to make a better system. So we talked about the change in culture, and the ecologist Stan Rowe talked about the landscapes of our making, match, and reflect society's cultural inscapes. So that the environment around us is kind of a reflection of our inner world and the type of relationships that we have. So we really needed to, in this process of change, look at cultural change. And this would be things like, really, I guess, identifying negative concepts like racist ideas, colonial ideas, colonial thinking, and replacing that with a better set of thoughts, which are about this idea of wâhkôhtowin, how we're all connected, we're all related, we're all reliant on each other. So we definitely wanted to reach out to the settler population with some of these ideas with Indigenous population, and also a growing immigrant population, and a number of immigrants who are getting engaged in agriculture as well. And this was a system map we came up with, which looked at this idea of culture. And one of the interesting things I think in working with Indigenous people is that isn't the case in secular, most secular environments in the Prairie region, where you, for example, can't really talk about spiritual things that easily, but with Indigenous people, that's central to them. So we talked about, really looking at a connection with the spiritual as part of this process. And we talked about, connecting with faith communities, with elders and so on. And we were able here to introduce some of the ideas from Baha'i concepts of processes of change, like the idea of the Training Institute, building capacity in people through children's education, junior spiritual empowerment, study, and so on, where people would come together and really develop together an understanding of their reality and where we need to go. And we talked about the idea of transforming governance and systems becoming more nonpartisan and so on. So many elements here. We talked about the idea of policy in terms of institutions, governance, universities, so on, schools of agriculture. And the idea that the central place in every culture should be occupied by agriculture, and how we need to really transform policy by really thinking from the grassroots level and involving many people in consultative processes, and thinking about things on a much deeper level when we make policy, a level that's consistent with this transformative vision. So again, we looked at many elements, including things like rural revitalization. Do we want kind of a food system where people are, where there's minimal number of very large farms, and there's no longer rural communities, small towns, villages, and so on, where people live and connect with each other? So how do we revitalize rural areas? How do we build effective educational systems? And also, how do we think of healthcare in terms of its connection to agriculture? So many different elements. And then the olive green figures are who should be involved in this transformative process: educators, healthcare professionals, environmental scientists, and so on. Like, who do we need to involve in this transformative process? We talked about regenerative farming and conserved ecosystems and wetlands to restore ecological functions. So that's, there's a kind of a movement in terms of changing farming systems, but also conserving ecosystems and restoring ecosystems. And so it'd be more of a balance between land that's being used by people for production and allowing natural areas to persist. So yes, so some of the functions, the conservation measures, the importance of agriculture in terms of climate risk amelioration, and we talk about the involvement of ranchers and so on in this process. And we started to think also about different types of land tenure. So land has been divided up into privately owned land, but could there be land system, layered land tenure, where there was more access to land by Indigenous people who like to hunt and to gather plants and so on. So we have some different models like community pastures and so on, where there's shared access to land. How can we come up with ideas that make more options possible through layered land tenure. Technology, what kind of knowledge systems, technological innovations do we need to support regenerative farming? And looked at many things in that area, and I guess particularly things like biological systems of agriculture. How do we improve our soil, make it more alive through enhancing the soil microbiome and so on. So many different possibilities in this area. And then a big part of the system change would be changing our diets. How does our diet actually influence agriculture? And there's that, you know, that the quote, eating is an agricultural act. So getting consumers engaged in these systems, in system change, thinking about systems and how they work. So yeah, and here the importance of traditional food systems is emphasized, working with elders and so on in the Indigenous community to identify ideal food systems for Indigenous people. How can we help to restore those by creating space for them to exist? And also, on the other hand, looking for everyone, just increase nutrient density, reduce pesticide load. How do we change our system by changing our diet? And find the economy, how to rethink our economy so it's not just about extracting from the land to generate income, much of which goes to the corporate world, to suppliers, and more thinking in terms of a type of economy that gives opportunities to more and more people to be on the land, to be in rural community, to become directly involved in food systems, and things which create more income that flows within the community rather than out of the community. So these are, you know, mapping out some of the concepts that we wanted to see in food systems that would diversify the economy, make it more locally connected. And so the way we thought would be effective in kind of supporting this transformative process was to create what we're calling a food system solution hub. So you may be familiar with social innovation projects, and one of the processes they have is social innovation labs, which is kind of bringing together a lot of people with an interest in change, perhaps at the local level, or it could be at the regional level, bringing people together, including people with expertise in various areas, and working over a long period of time to identify problems and identify solutions. And so this would be kind of the creation of an ongoing institution. And it could use processes like the charrette process, which is used in design, which is a very effective way of kind of collecting people's awareness of their own situation and concepts that they have for change that are productive, and kind of building them together into a collective consciousness. So this is a process we're involved in trying to establish now. So one of the differences with our group and other groups who were Food System Vision Prize winners is we came together actually to make this vision. So we didn't have an organization in place. So we have to do that. We're in the process of doing that now. And so we've done a number of things now. We've set up our website. We're starting to collaborate with different groups. Interestingly, one of the things we thought would be potential is really connecting with emerging solutions. So out of any complex system, certain concepts and ideas emerge sort of spontaneously. And we're finding throughout the prairies, there's many exciting things that are happening that are very much consistent with this vision that we have. So let's say when we built our website and our social media presence, we thought, well, we can hire a company, or we could go to, like, let's say, our technical school, talk to the students about what we're doing, and see if they would be interested in participating in this project. So that's what we did. We went to SAS Polytech, and we talked to the graphic communications, interactive design and technology groups, and they were very interested in what we're doing. And so they helped us to build, identify people who could help us build websites and so on. So this gave them an opportunity to contribute to this process, but also put some of their concepts that they're learning about into practice. We're working on a food system declaration. A number of Indigenous communities around the world have created declarations which kind of give a statement that people can connect with and think about, that kind of crystallizes thought. So we're working on a food system declaration for the prairies. The documentary, which you saw the section of that documentary that we're involved in, and the documentary is being put together for all 10 projects and will be released at Regen 10. Regen 10 is a part of the COP system around climate change, and they're trying to highlight agriculture more in the whole process of climate change amelioration. And so that will be coming out shortly, the full story around Regen 10. So Regen 10 is kind of a movement to ensure that by 2030, 50% of the world's food can be produced in a way that drives positive outcomes for people, nature, and for climate. So we're connecting our project to that process as well. And also there's been a really interesting international collaboration. We were invited into the Food Systems Game Changers Lab, and it had 24 groups, cohorts involved in many different areas of food system change. And we were put into the Elevating Indigenous Food Systems change with groups from Kenya, our group in Canada, Nigeria, Micronesia, and Brazil. So these kind of very, very diverse group with different food systems entirely coming together to say, could we come up with a solution together that would be an effective way to deal with our common problems? And we did come up with an interesting solution. So these are the 24 cohorts with that group, with the Game Changers Lab. And so the one we were involved in was this idea of linking communities by sharing traditional and localized knowledge. We talked about the idea of creating a solutions lab in a pilot solution lab process in each of these 5 countries. And that's what we're involved with, getting off the ground now. And we thought in the long term, this would be a way of kind of building Indigenous and local food systems and the value of them, and then sharing them on an international level. Excuse me. So just to conclude, we're talking really about this idea of changing a whole narrative. There's a narrative about what our food systems are in the prairie region. And this is, I think the case around the world, but often the idea of colonial systems, industrial and extractive systems have been imposed on people and landscapes. So we're talking about creating a new story, this idea of kwayēskastasowin wâhkôhtowin, which is about, rethinking everything, building on a sense of the relatedness of all things, the unity of all things, and setting our relationships right. How can we do this over a period of time, using ideas like a solution lab that allow people to work together to build grassroots solutions and move forward with that type of thinking. So our steps are really widening our circle of collaborators. We're making steps to do that. Incorporating as a group, hiring staff, and developing this solution lab or solution hub, which is our next step. So that is basic outline of what we're doing, and happy to take your questions. Hopefully I've explained it well. What's your reaction?
My reaction is, wow. That's just so impressive, and how inclusive and kind of sweeping, yet brought down so that it's practical and there are next steps. I'm just delighted to learn about this.
Oh, great. Thanks, Dee.
Thank you. Thank you. So if you have a question, could you just raise your hand? And that way we can take people in order. Oh, Winnie?
Yeah, I'm really interested in the fact that you said it's so easy to talk about spiritual subjects with the Indigenous, whereas others don't find it so easy. Are there strategies that have already been thought of how this might come to be a little more universal in the program?
Well, I'm just, one thing I've noticed is if you're in a gathering where Indigenous people are there and have a prominent role, they always start with prayer. There's always that connection with the Creator is always mentioned, and so on. So kind of in these very secular environments, let's say like universities and so on, or places where people are kind of reluctant to speak about spirituality, it kind of changes that all. And as people are trying to learn how to respect Indigenous people, then they give them that space to bring in the spiritual element. So it's it kind of opens that opportunity. And so yeah, the question I guess is, can we expand that to more and more spaces? I'm thinking the more and more we open to Indigenous people and they're working with other people in various kind of settings and environments, the more it becomes possible. Indigenous people in the prairies are about 15% of the population and growing, because the birth rate is higher amongst Indigenous than non-Indigenous people. So the thinking is, especially in, let's say, in the school systems and so on, the percentage of Indigenous people keeps going up and up. So these kinds of, the influence that they bring into many settings is growing. So it's a positive thing. See, Richard?
Yes, thank you. In the documentary, there was a young lady who was from Brightwater. Brightwater.
Yeah.
How is that organization part of this whole picture, and what are they doing specifically?
Well, a lot of what we're doing is around, I guess, rather than trying to create new things, we're saying what's already happening out there. Mm-hmm. And what are the emergent solutions that are already happening, identify them, make people more aware of them, and how they're all linked to each other in a way.
Right.
So Brightwater is, an educational center that's supporting the same kind of thinking that is part of our vision. So, and Elizabeth, who was highlighted there, is an outstanding example of this. And she's also working with a group that connects school classrooms with farms. And the classroom goes to the farm and helps to build diverse food forest type shelter belts on farms. So they link a farm with a classroom, and they're trying to set this up all over the province of Saskatchewan, where classrooms get linked to a farm. So there's really kind of a beautiful set of solutions that are coming out of educational systems as well. So yeah, it's a great initiative. I see David Vanderdusen.
Well, I want to thank you for this wonderful presentation. I have a few questions, and hopefully you can help me a little bit. So it seems the focus was a lot on the primary production of food. And I see the focus on whole rural community engagement is really important. And then there was a little bit about urban communities, like city lifestyle communities, also possibly being involved. Just in sort of the overall vision, were any numbers crunched on what percentage of people would be directly involved in food production, like the primary food production? Are we seeing like half of the world's population engaged in this? Are we seeing 10% of the world's population engaged in this? Maybe those numbers haven't been crunched. I'm just kind of curious.
Well, I think it's it's very different in different places. In the prairies now, it's agriculture. It's down to, I don't know what, and Neil would know, probably maybe 2-3% of the population are farming. Maybe, I don't know what the percentage of rural population is, also dwindling. But in many places, a large portion of the population are farmers, smallholder farmers, and so on. But I guess our goal was to ensure that more people are engaged in agriculture. If we can help to revitalize rural communities, not just through agriculture, but maybe other activities and industries going on in rural areas, so that rural communities are strengthened and can support more services like schools and medical services and so on. And more people engaged in diverse kind of agricultural activities, urban agriculture, more people growing some of their own food. So let's say the average person could grow 5% of their own food, and so engage directly in agriculture in that way. So that might involve more urban agriculture, more community gardens and so on, which is already happening, but just more efforts to encourage that and get people engaged. So yeah, I don't know if that.
Well, I just wondered, just in broad strokes, how the vision for all of humanity, where it sort of fit in. And I certainly am supportive of strengthening the quality of life for people involved directly in agriculture. And so that means strong rural communities. So, it's very important, that aspect of work, to have some diversification, access to good medical care, good schooling, all those things that as farms have gotten larger, rural communities have struggled a lot just because the population base has shifted so much. So this is very, very positive to see the effort going in this area. The other thing I sort of had a question about in your model was, there's a lot of talk about from farm to fork, and a lot of the discussion takes place around the actual primary production. The question about getting it on people's forks, the processing of that food to something that we eat. Like historically, when we had the native communities and it was the Three Sisters with the beans and the corns and the squash, the food preparation was pretty direct. You can almost eat it right out of the field. With the hunting and gathering aspect, of course, they didn't have refrigeration. So if you ate meat, you had to preserve it in some other way. and then, could consume it over time. But a lot of the work was often gender-based, what would be done within the rural communities, nomadic communities, and any sort of that processing of food. Have any discussions come up around gender issues and who's expected to convert it from a primary food to what we actually, put on our plates?
I don't think we've had a lot of discussions about gender issues in our setting. I think there's a definite over the last 50 years or so that there's been a big change in terms of gender in the food industry in our area. I don't know to what extent that has occurred, but I think you see more and more women in agricultural settings, in farming, in research, research science, and so on, extension service, all areas of the university community, and so on. So, and then in food processing, I guess probably, I don't know what the kind of ratios are, gender ratios and so on in that industry where we are. So, but yeah, very important issue. But I think a lot of progress has been made in that area where we live.
Neil, did you have something to say? I know there was a little question there.
As far as I got statistics on Saskatchewan, this project encompasses the prairies, so it's Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. But in Saskatchewan, there's a bit over 1 million people, and the percent rural is about 30%. And of that rural, or of the whole province, the percentage that are farmers is 10%. So 10 to 12% are farmers still. So, and I got a bunch of other stats on farm size and inputs and all that kind of stuff. So if anybody wants it, you're welcome to it. I haven't kept it up in the last few years, but I have all the stats for the 20th century from 1900 to 2000. I have to redo the last 20 years, but I just extrapolated a little bit to arrive at a round number.
Great. We do have a couple of comments here in the chat. Janet, did you have something that you wanted to say? I see you put something in the chat.
Well, I just saw how relevant it is for the social action that we're trying to do in Uganda too. We just don't have the expertise, but because we were in Uganda, we didn't have those kind of, ability to present or things like that. But the same idea where there are already people like Girls for Climate Action, Eco Mamas, Eco Shelter, Generation Roots are already working with schools. They're already planting trees. And so in the area around the Nile River starts, where out of Lake Victoria, there's all these groups. So we just brought them all together. And we found so much expertise amongst the Indigenous people that knew a lot about agroecology already, people who knew about, building the soil, people who knew how to make tree nurseries and so on. And the problem is the land has been commercialized into bigger sugarcane, operations and large scale operations that take the land away from the Indigenous people. So even though the grandmothers still know a lot about growing trees and fruits and things, but it's like we've seen a turnaround even in the short time, like about a year and a half or so that we've been involved. And the Rotary Club has come on board with it. The Rotary Club, local Rotary Clubs are helping to get the trees out to the schools, and there's more climate education in schools, and there's a lot more harmonizing with the youth empowerment program and so on. It's really exciting to see as people realize that they can be empowered to do things and how they spread. Empowerment is really so important. I just don't know what's going to happen when they hit up against the commercial interests, but I I wish we could learn from you. I wish we could be part of those 5. Or if we could send an intern to Kenya, you know, we had sent an intern to Kijani Forestry that are doing stuff in another part of Uganda. That's helpful, but we need to learn more about what you're doing and figure out how we can move forward too. Like the Solution Innovation Lab, we need to know more about those things and how we can present things to people in such a way that we can actually get funding, because our little pensions are very limiting. Anyway.
Yeah, there's a wonderful group in Kenya that you could probably connect with, and we could share their contacts with you, and sort of they're involved with this concept and solution lab concept, and so they might be willing to chat with you about that. We'll put
Thank you.
I'll try and find the contact while we're talking here and put it into the chat. Janet. I see Kevin has his hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Hello, Janet and crowd. How are you guys doing? Good to see you again. I won't belabor the point, but we're working with smallholder farmers in Mali. As a matter of fact, I'll be spending the month of November in Mali. We're putting in a farm to fork ecosystem. And I think there was a good question that was raised by, I think it was David, if I recall, was like the downstream of processing. Is that the same issue goes with cash crops in Mali? Is that how do you support smallholder farmers who are kind of caught in this cycle of being subservient to the middleman? So this is the problem. I think that really has to be solved mainly with regards to the sustainability and commercialization of smallholder farmers is to break that hold of the intermediary, i.e. the collector, aggregator, wholesaler, mass market vendor. And we think that we have a solution for that in Mali, and we've started to implement that. And so I won't belabor it here, but there are ways to break that mold. The other challenge that happens, and I think it happens here in Canada, it happens is whether it's in a settler colonial environment like Canada or a neo-colonial environment like Africa, is overcoming the deeply ingrained systemic prejudices of financial institutions, development funding institutions, international institutions have for supporting directly smallholder farmers. We've been through this process for 4 or 5 years now, and it really always distills down to a deep-rooted systemic failure of funding agencies to actually support diversified, indigenous-led rural farming. They all support aggregators and the people in the middle because there's this false notion about what risk is. There's a go-to position about what risk is. And it's a false narrative. It's a very false narrative. And when we have opportunities to have elevated conversations with people about supporting indigenous agriculture, once we get them past their go-to false narratives about really deep-rooted prejudicial narratives about the risk, the so-called risk of funding indigenous-led farming, smallholder farming operations, then we can get them talking. But it's a real challenge right now because there's a lot of go-to systemic barriers to actually funding some very well thought out programs for empowering smallholder farmers. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Kevin. Interesting. Yeah, I think that's issues like that, credit and so on are very significant in indigenous communities where let's say land is and property is held communally. And most of borrowing relates to having some kind of property or something that you can put up as collateral, and you're not able to do that when land is held communally. So this is kind of an interesting interesting issue in terms of raising capital and so on.
So I think Bill has his hand up.
In our area, we have a large Native population here, and they teach people about the 4 directions. They teach people about the 4 colors of man. And that eventually, when all these colors unite, everyone will be the color of Mother Earth.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very unifying vision. One of the questions I had was, sometimes it's difficult to grow food in this area because of the soil so poor. Okay, it's clay. A lot of it's been washed down the river due to floods in the 1920s. So what we've got is rock hard clay to work with. The other problem is, how do you you harvest a crop? Now you've only got a certain amount of time before it spoils. And I had a couple of freezers I was keeping the stuff in, and the power went down. So now you just lost a couple $1,000s worth of food. The only thing I was thinking about, the way to do it would be to deal with drying the food. Do you have any ideas on that?
Sorry, no.
Okay.
No, I don't.
But I got
definitely a traditional way of preserving food here.
Yeah.
was drying.
Yeah. And but I think every community is going to be facing this poor soil, and how do you store the food? I think that's going to be something we're going to have to really look at, because it's not going to do you good to grow all food if you can't harvest it and can't store it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it'll do you no good.
Mm-hmm.
William, there's for soil restoration, you've got a really good organization in the United States. I'm assuming you're from the United States.
Yes, I am.
Called SARE, and they got, it's about cover crops, various other aspects. So SARE means Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. And it's all about restoring the soil, and they've gathered information from almost every area of the United States. So you could perhaps contact or look that up online and see if you can find some local contacts.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
That's SARE?
Yes,
SARE.
Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. It's a really quite an extensive program, and they look strong. They must be receiving a lot of funding, and it appears to me that they'll even
I'll
get.
take a look at that. I've been looking at a lot of different programs where they're really working on trying to get the microbes in the soil going. You know, and they're also working on using mushrooms to help do that. It's really interesting. But without the microbes in the soil, nothing's going to grow because the plants can't get the nutrients.
This is all about that. It's really, really good.
I'll check that out.
I'm on some contract. Maybe I'll just mention here, Paul, that I think what's interesting about this project, and Rockefeller actually setting these principles up so that we could write about it, is that it's we've been able to, as you notice, we've been able to incorporate a lot of the Baha'i principles into it. So it's a long-term 30+ year vision, and it's rare to have a project that sort of looks that far ahead. And so I see it as a cushion and a foundation for Baha'u'llah's New World Order. So trying to put farmer as the first agent in human society and reconstruction of the world. So a lot of people talk about the corporations being an impediment, and I really believe they are, but I don't. A lot of people talk about them crashing. I actually see them as transforming under pressure. So I personally have a contract right now working on cover crops and replacement of synthetic nitrogen the petroleum-based nitrogen in agriculture with more natural means. And all my money is from the federal government of Canada. This is and the provincial government, which is quite quite a right-wing government that supports corporations, is into it and really supporting it as well. And so I'm writing things for them right now too. So this is all about cover crops and replacing synthetic nitrogen, and the corporations, I mean, the people receiving funding, it's just not just me that's doing this, there's a whole bunch of us, and some of them are involved, some of them are closely involved with the agrochemical corporations. And so I think it's more likely that these strong corporations are going to conform to more sustainable agriculture, looking at cover crops and legumes. And the corporations are really trying to promote their biologicals right now instead of the toxic agrochemicals. They still have the toxic agrochemicals, but before those started being produced after World War II, these same corporations were promoting biologicals. They're going back to it and trying to do that. And that makes them quite supportive of organic farming as well. And so even though on the Canadian prairies, we have less than 5% organic farms, it looks like there's a lot that are going to integrated pest management. So we've got, what the government wants people to do, and farmers and their people like myself that are facilitating farmers, is to cut back on agrochemicals. And so you get a more integrated approach. And so we're looking at a lot more legumes in the crop rotation and various other components that I could elaborate on another time.
Well, thanks, Neil.
Thank you. Winnie?
Yes, I thought I needed to make a plug for our agriculture reading groups here, because if you're going to restore the soil, you really need to understand those microorganisms. And last cycle, we had folks studying the life in the soil, which is really a textbook of all of this. And that group has evolved into another iteration where they are going to study other things in order to make a textbook for young people about microorganisms. I see Janet just grinning because she's she and Ned are part of that activity. And we've talked for a long time in this group about creating texts about agriculture for younger folks. And so perhaps as your wonderful program evolves, there will come about that sort of activity as well in the educational components. But we are just forming our fall cycle of these groups. And so if there's anyone that wants to join one, it may not be too late. Most of them have not had their first meeting, and one of them is called Eating the Landscape. If you want to get in touch, just write, Dawn, are you the easiest one for these folks to be in touch with, or ag reading groups directly?
Probably ag reading groups.
Okay.
I can put that in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Alberta Telfer, who's in Alberta, is the co-facilitator with me of this. And Eating the Landscapes is an interesting book about native grazing. And then Finding the Mother Tree is about agroforestry and how you learn about the trees and their interactions. Then we have one on how to feed the world, which is already started, and Dawn is in that group. And that's a series of essays from Purdue University agriculture folks. And then this new one, I don't think they have a name yet, Janet, but the one that's forming the textbook that evolved from Life in the Soils.
It's
And
Finding the Mother Tree. The book is
the same. No, that's a different group. And then there's a fifth group that is a compilation food farmer and community, agriculture and reconstruction of the world. So there are a number of groups that if you want to join one, and if you didn't keep in mind what they all were, just be in touch with me or Alberta. But thank you for letting me make this plug.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Great.
I should just mention that when we've been meeting about the Life in the Soil book, we've been having some Zoom people come on from Uganda also enjoying the learning. And we've got also junior youth in Kansas, Missouri.
Lost you, Janet.
I think she's in a car. I think she may have
She's
gone in
mobile.
a dead.
I think we lost her. All right. So we're coming
Joanna.
up just a few more minutes. Oh, Janet, are you there again?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We lost you for a second there.
I can sing a First Nation chant at the end if you want.
So any other questions, comments?
One thing I just wanted to say was, as I moved to Molokai, what I find really interesting is that all the same processes are happening here. All the same negative and positive processes are happening here than there were in Saskatchewan, where I lived most of my life. And it's really wonderful to see all these initiatives of sustainable farming and so on underway here, people trying to deal with colonialism and rebuild traditional systems. It's really nice to see, but it's a struggle. But I think the most successful ones are where they're doing it on the small scale. And a lot of people are trying to just, okay, how do we feed ourselves, feed our community, share with others, and so on. And there is a couple here, you might be something to look at in the future, who are a Baha'i couple who are perma farmers and are really, very, very advanced level perma-farmers. And so we'd have to figure out how to do because they're off in the bush and their links aren't that good, but we could figure out something, and they'd probably be interested in sharing their story because it's quite exciting.
Yeah, that'd be great if you could just get us the information. We could, or if you
Sure.
want to contact them and let us know.
I'll pass it on. Yeah.
That'd be great.
And along that line, Dawn, as we're forming our next year calendar, anyone here might offer to us some other notions. Aren't we up to we have January, is that right?
I think we're up to January now.
Yeah.
Next month is Kalenga, and December is Kevin Wilson.
Right. Yes, next month we're going to be having Masaidio Kalenga, who is in Uganda, and he's been involved in some of the Baha'i international community discussions with UN and the Food and Agriculture Organization about a lot of different issues relating to agriculture, kind of big issues like climate and migration and things like that, where people who have been affected by climate change or don't have land, all these things are forcing people to migrate. And so these are some of the bigger issues. And so he'll be with us next month.
Dawn,
October.
Maybe the new people, there's quite a few folks we haven't seen on here before.
Right.
If you all look at your invitation at the bottom, there, Dawn does a wonderful job of putting these on YouTube eventually. So there's a great library already started of very interesting presentations that have gone on before.
Right. And I'll put a link here in the chat of it's a link to our subscribe page if you want to get on the list to get invitations, but also on that page is some information and also links to the videos. I post those links to the videos up there. So if you just want to look at the different videos of different speakers, those are up there on our webpage too. So I think we're about ready to close out unless anyone else, any other comments, any other questions?
Just thanks for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to tell you about our project and connect with people that I've met here and there throughout the years too. Again,
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Do you want the closing native chanter?
Yes. Sure, Jen.
Okay, so it's Hulkaminum, and it means love is alive in our hearts. And it's a lullaby that mothers have passed on to their children for 500 years. I was given the honor of learning it at an Aboriginal Success by 6 meeting in BC. So I just wanted to preface that it's a sacred piece. And Sli haleni itangak tela, Sli haleni itangak te, Mas so kawatan, mas tetan, Sli haleni itangak tela. Love is alive in our hearts. Love is alive in our hearts. With every drumbeat, with every breath, love is alive in our hearts. Sweet Haleni Itangatila. Sweet Haleni Itangatila. Sakalatin, Satan, Haleni.
Thank you.